Saint Dragon, a totally bizarre idea of a horizontal scrolling shoot 'em up, but this 1989 arcade classic by Jaleco is one of the best of its era. I said this in yesterday's Silkworm Ports video. Saint Dragon was once a huge topic of discussion amongst shoot 'em up fans, but I don't think it gets enough attention today, whilst most YouTubers are talking about the obvious 1980s shoot 'em ups. So what makes Saint Dragon so good? Yes, the 80s was full of shooters, but this one in particular had a charm and uniqueness of its own. Control the cyborg Saint Dragon and just watch that thing move with its awesome armored tail, which you can also use to defend yourself. Collect tokens through the game to give you a better scope of weaponry and take on mountains of robotic enemies. Each is cool looking as Saint Dragon itself. This is one stylish and classy game with a hell lot of replay value. Did I even mention how great the music and sound effects are here? Really though, Saint Dragon easily goes down as one of my personal favourites, although it's definitely a tough game. So as always, we're going to be looking at the worst and working our way to the very best and most faithful conversion of Saint Dragon. We are giving Amstrad CPC's 1990 conversion the worst conversion of Saint Dragon. It looks terrible and it makes me feel angry playing it, and really is just awful altogether really. Where do I start with this game? Well, firstly, the frame rate issue. Although I have covered low frame rate games for the CPC in the past and have partly said, sure, they are playable to an extent, this really isn't the case here for Saint Dragon. It is beyond slow to play with a plethora of enemy bullets surrounding you. It is just hard to avoid things due to frame rate drops and being such a small gameplay area with larger sprites. It is at times unavoidable not to die with this version. I appreciate the larger sprites in order to emulate the arcade look, but really the gameplay area is so small and makes things so tricky. We have no music here and sound effects that kind of sound like somebody just gave up with this version altogether. Truly a shocking port. Okay, so we have an interesting one here with the MSX port. Now, you will find that we don't have music or sound effects with this version. We do have a fairly decent gameplay area though, so that's already an upgrade from the lousy Amstrad CPC port. It does get fairly slow, but surprisingly, everything is here, including the robotic leopards, which also jump too when approaching them. Enemy sprite placements are roughly the same as the arcades. It's not a bad version to be honest. What really lets this one down is its no music or sound effects. The slowdowns can be annoying, but compare this with the Amstrad's version, then this one is leap years ahead already. Everything seems to work fine here regardless of a couple of obvious issues. Control in Saint Dragon is nice and its armored tail looks pretty nicely drawn here too. The ZX Spectrum 128K models had a fairly okay conversion. Spectrum games can often look much like MSX games, and this one partly does, although we have a couple of added colours here, so it's not strictly monochrome like a lot of Spectrum games were. Let's be honest, attempting Saint Dragon for the Spectrum is one thing, having it play so well is another thing entirely. Yes, it does slightly struggle in places, but it plays so well, and although it's got different colours to the arcades game like most Spectrum games, this brings its own charm. I love playing Spectrum games on my OLED screen. Those colours really pop out and look so nice. The game itself then, very tight controls here, collision detection is great, Saint Dragon's tail acts really nicely to catch projectiles. I guess you could say this game is slightly above average for a ZX Spectrum game. It's really nice to play and includes everything here, including the jumping leopards on stage 1. No music, just sound effects with this 1990 Storm release. Although the Atari ST conversion admittedly looks stunning, complete with large sprites which look very faithful to the arcades game, sadly the Atari ST struggles running Saint Dragon, which is such a shame. Otherwise this could have been a superb conversion. The included music and sound effects are also really nicely done here with beautiful looking backdrops added. It's this type of game where, although it's a job of the coders to make it look as close as possible to the source material, just taking away a few things that are causing the severe slowdowns could have made all the difference here and actually made this version so much more playable than the release that we got for the ST. An absolute shame. This is one of the best looking Atari ST arcade conversions I have seen in this series. It even includes the iconic introduction screen with St. Dragon flying upwards into the distance. Storm published the Commodore 64 conversion in 1990. This is how to program the Commodore 64 to be as good as possible right next to what it's actually trying to imitate. Yes, St. Dragon for the Commodore 64 is a belter of a conversion. As you will see, complete full screen. Sprites are on the smaller side admittedly, but we do have plenty of room to maneuver around with St. Dragon. Sadly, it does drop in frame rates every now and again, but come on, this is an 8-bit microcomputer. And look at what it's trying to copy here. St. Dragon was of course going to be a task for any 8-bit computer. We got an option of in-game music or in-game sound effects only. I chose music only, which sounded pretty damn good. It's a nice game to control with spot on collision detection, and it truly is as faithful as you can get next to the arcade shoot 'em up on an 8-bit microcomputer. There are a couple of cutbacks such as robotic leopards which don't jump here, not a massive deal breaker as such. I made it to the end of stage 1 here, and I'm glad I don't suffer with epilepsy, as prior to the boss coming into the scene we are presented with several flashes, which looks cool, but I was kind of thinking, what's happening? But regardless, it's a great C64 conversion. Next up, we have the Acom Corporation's 1990 release. Now, although this is a decent enough game, and it resembles what it's trying to achieve really nicely, I cannot help but notice two things with this PC Engine or TurboGrafx 16 port. Firstly, the colours used here are fairly dark in contrast in comparison to the other versions. And secondly, the music is very slow here too. Almost reminded me of that chilled out reggae pace of music. The sprites here are relatively small, and there can be a considerable amount of sprite flicker too. This port isn't frame rate perfect, but it does its job fairly well for the hardware it is running from. It's not a bad version by any means at all, and definitely worth a go if you've not tried this one. The 1990 Storm release of St. Dragon for the Commodore Amiga is a fairly decent port. Much like all of the other versions though, it isn't 100% perfect in terms of power in the game. It's by no means as bad as the Atari ST version, but can slow down at times, but nonetheless very playable with a nice full screen, nice introduction, and nicely implemented colours that look very faithful to the arcade game itself. It's nice to control and includes everything with almost the same placements of enemies as the arcade game. Level of difficulty with the Commodore Amiga game is toned down greatly, and that's not exactly a bad thing. For those of you who played the original game will know how ridiculously tough this game can get. Just like yesterday's Silkworm video, the Amiga nailed it really in comparison to every other version produced. It's not 100% perfect like I say, but likely is the best version out there, which looks and sounds like the arcade game itself. So anyways, that's it for today's ranking the various different home conversions of St. Dragon. Which version did you have, and which version would you have placed in #1 position? Obviously for me, I personally thought the Commodore Amiga was the most faithful. But anyways, until next video comes, thanks for watching.